Yeah, I ran CSS tricks for a long time, and I put that in my notes because I found it notable thinking back that I don't think I'm particularly good at trickery. I just like appreciate it. Like I don't think there's one CSS trick that I can claim that's like the one that Chris Coyier put out in the world. Yet I'm a lover of them and appreciate when other people do really clever, interesting, fancy stuff in CSS. I was just looked at that and I could like dissect it, I could explain it, I could showcase it or talk about it, but I'm not very good at like coming up with one.
Visit the fan at CSS
Welcome, Chris Coyier, to the show. We have an amazing guest, and he needs no intro. I could give him a small one, but he's written a ton of articles, owns CSS tricks, has CodePen, is an incredibly powerful CSS person, and they're on the show to talk about what they suck at today. Hey, Chris, how's it going? And what you bad at?
Powerful. I like the word. Nobody's ever called me powerful before, but I'll take that. I'll take that for forever. Yeah, I knew I was going to be on you boys' show, and I was writing down things I'm bad at CSS, but I ran out of paper. You should
have been using the web, man. Why did you use paper?
Right. It was metaphorical. Yeah, I was trying to think of specific things and generic things because I don't know. This show doesn't even exist yet as I'm on it, so I don't have any stuff to reference really. But one that I thought of right away that's just really straightforward is really anything 3D. You know what I'm talking about, guys? When people are like, God. I'll just make a cube. I feel like that's the demo you've seen 1,000 times. As the proprietor of CodePen, I've seen 1,000 CS cubes. And I feel like the classic way is just, make 6 divs and then and then each one of those divs gets a little bit different translate 3D stuff on it. And you like move it around in 3D space. But I'm like,
how hard could it be?
I really, and then how do you make the edges fit good or whatever? It's not like I've tried 10 times and failed, but I look at usually anything 3D and CSS and be like, this language that's just weird. I don't understand
totally
it.
I empathize with this one. Yeah.
I don't get how it works. And it was exacerbated this week as I saw a 3D by Ben Evans, who tends to be, you don't hear from him and then all of a sudden drops some painting or something in CSS and you're like, wow, bro. Really cool. It was like a Doom-like thing where you can press the arrow keys and traverse the 3D maze, but really adheres to that there isn't a single line of JavaScript. It's not one of those like, well, yeah, except the arrow keys. Those are JavaScript or something. Even those, I believe, are using one of the trickery things, probably radio inputs and checked or whatever it is. I didn't even look at it, but it's got to be something like that, or the target selector. Who knows? There's a couple of like fake ways to do interactivity in CSS, but I was like, oh my God, that's, how do you even begin to plan something like that?
What is the perspective value? Like what's the perspective value you use and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a classic one that crossed my mind too, is the because I'm stealing it from somebody who wrote into CSS tricks, but to our other show, Shop Talk show. That said perspective was one of theirs. They're like, I don't know, 100 pixels? Is that a good one?
Put up more or less?
Yeah. Like, what does that even mean, really? Is it like your eyeballs are 100 pixels from the screen? Is that
and
what we're
talking about?
And
it's so foundational, It's like if you don't set it right at the beginning, like your whole world view needs to be based off of this one value. So you better pick the right one. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know why any of these would be better than the other one.
Right. Like, what does 1 pixel mean? It's just a guess and test thing, which is okay. I think a lot of CSS ends up being that way. I mean, you'd think of like all of DevTools and your tool VisBug. The point of it is kind of like you should just play and find the value that you like, and then there you go, you got it.
Listen to your heart; it's telling you what to do when you write your styles. Yeah.
I feel like almost should be emphasized more. You read an article about typography or something, and it's like, well, you pick these fonts that go together because, science says they should or something, or what's the best line height for this paragraph at this moment? And you're like, I don't even care. I don't even want to learn the science. I want to
I love
adjust
it
a
when math
thing
is
until
wrong.
yeah.
You know, like sometimes they're like, I chose a mathematical typography system. I'm like, yep, and it looks crappy. I used math to make my color palettes. I'm like, yep, they look crappy.
Yeah.
It's just like why we have optical kerning. I used math to make all my letters equally spaced. Yeah, it looks crappy. You know, like you should use your eye.
Yeah.
It turns out humans aren't very mathematical. We're
Yeah,
weirdos and
just look at
chaos, and
it.
we like
You should be
yeah, just
worried
look
about
at
your
it, feel it.
you should be worried about your level of taste.
Yes.
We need a tasteometer in CSS.
I'm gonna
So
start
yeah,
licking my CSS and rubbing my body on it because I want to feel it and I want to taste it.
yeah, it definitely has
This
a
is what
certain.
this is kind of how it is recording with Adam. You get one nice gem every episode where you're like, are we gonna edit that one out or not? No, okay, we're gonna keep it. It's fine. It's okay.
Well, that was a
That's
perfect
real
one.
stuff though. It sounds like a joke, but really, your taste goes a long way in
really
picking
does, yeah.
values and stuff like that. I don't know if that's related to 3D. Somehow we got there, but 3D certainly
It
is one
definitely
that's
is perspective.
very mysterious.
You
and bad. Yeah.
gotta taste your perspective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other people are going to be tasting it. You know, their eyes are going to be slurping the pixels up. And, you know, you're either a nice Slurpee or you're like a old beer. And yeah, you don't want to be the old beer perspective value.
The thing that has surprised me the most as I've like, over the years, like really been like, I'm gonna learn the CSS thing like hardcore, is that when I first got in, I was like, you know what? There's probably like some system here. Like you pick these values, you do this thing, you use this technique, and then everything's going to be like mostly fine with like edge cases. And the more and more I learn, the less and less I learn that is true. Where I'm like, okay, so why would I use this one in this case? Like, okay, so we would use grid here, right? Because it's good. Like, actually, no, because of the way this screen will change, I think flex will work best here. I'm like, but I thought grid was not for this one. Or the same thing with like, okay, so I'm gonna want to like really set like I want to set this to resize automatically as the screen goes with maybe like some intrinsic sizing instead of breakpoints, right? And they're like, actually, the heights are gonna need to be synced, so you're gonna need to follow the breakpoints and set like 3 or 4, maybe even 6 breakpoints to keep the height synced all the way through, because intrinsic size will mess up with the lines on the cards or something. And all those things to me have somehow made me happier.
So there
Knowing like,
is right and wrong answers, but the path to getting to them, it was a little weirder than we thought.
Just that, or maybe that there really isn't any right and wrong answers, and that when I make a bad decision, maybe it's not a bad decision. Maybe it's just, a decision. And that's what's made me happiest, is that I can make that and be like, you know what? It does the thing right now, and then maybe someone will come through and eviscerate my code in a code review, but I'll be like, you know what? Your code is better, but it still does the same thing as it did before. So there. I win.
Right. I had a PR this morning that was rewritten by my co-founder, and I looked at his code and I'm like, this is what it's nicer to look at. Like, I get what you're doing here, and there are some things that you could point to, but it does the same thing.
Can't do anything different.
It does the same thing.
It's like state management in JavaScript. Everyone's like, oh, this is so much better. And you're like, well, it's doing the same thing. You're like, yeah, but what happens when you need to add a new action? And you're like, yeah, what's that? And
we're bickering over really tiny things that don't matter that much. So how strange of us.
You know what? I feel like as CSS authors, we're the ones tasting it first. Like if right, like what you're saying, the state management library doesn't matter to a user, and it shouldn't, right? So what does matter to them is when they land on the site, what do they see? What can they feel? What can they click on? What can they touch? What can they scroll? And so we're there making all of the machinery mean something to the user in that moment. And I have this rant about cars. I'm like, you could have the best engine in the world inside of a car, and if I sit down on it and the seat's all squeaky, and it's like got a weird wiggly steering wheel, I'm gonna be like, nah, this car sucks. Like, I don't care about your engine. I still need to be comfortable in here. And so we're the ones sitting in these Formula One rigs with all these brand new engines first and going, if this car really can go this fast, how do I make the UI feel like it's that fast? How do I complement the functionality of this thing? And anyway, we're the first tastemakers. We're there licking it first, y'all.
I'm sure.
So yeah, we covered
really
3D.
HTML, you can be like, we actually are first. You're second.
No, I was saying, so I've been super interested to have you on because I've been following CSS tricks since almost the very beginning. Whenever I needed to do, I don't want to date anyone because I recently got dated for probably the first time in my career. Like I'm 35, and I work on Firebase, and I was talking to someone who joined the team, and I was like, "Hi, I'm David," and he was like, "Yeah, I know you. I was watching your YouTube videos all the way back in, wait for it, high school." And I literally was like, "You said high school, right?" And he's like, "Yeah. I watched your videos in high school." And I'm like, "Because they're that long ago, and so you could technically be in high school and watch the videos and be here today and work with me." Okay, glad to have you on the team. So I don't want to date you, Chris, but I used to read all the articles back when I do my homework in college, which is not high school. So I feel like that's a little better here.
Yeah, I also don't mind. I'm okay being old at this point.
Yeah,
I
Gives
have to
me
old
get
some
used to it.
perspective, and I feel pretty plugged in still. Like I don't. It's not like I look at what's going on in tech and be like, I don't know what they're up to anymore. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
me
basically
either.
do it.
That doesn't happen to me. Yeah, me too. I feel plugged right in. No, but like I used to read all your articles and be like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then I used to get tons of compliments on my homework in college because people would be like, how did it work that way?"
Oh,
Because I'd
nice.
always take the extra mile to do the UI, and they'd be like, "I can click things. That's really cool. I didn't want a
Yeah.
command line
you
tool."
gotta.
That's a
Yeah.
nice thought. I think that's cool that CSS can kind of be this little cheat code sometimes where, you know,
Oh yeah,
putting on a little UX and UI paint on something can really, especially when your competitors aren't, and your competitors in your case where your colleagues in college. But it can make people feel differently. I mean, I guess Adam said that too, that, this beautiful car with a crappy seat, it's the same kind of thing. It breeds trust and stuff. I mean, designers know this inherently, but it's some startup or something that maybe isn't even that cool, but they have just this amazing landing page. I'm like, well, that looks like a good product.
yes.
I should get out my credit card for that thing. Whatever.
My favorite luxury trick is that the more expensive a design studio is, or the more expensive the product is, or whatever, when you land on the website, the design always has more waste than other sites do. And I mean white space waste. It's almost like they're like, you could see it even like Dior or like one of these brand logos. They use a thin font that's capitalized and really widely spaced apart. They're like, we're so rich and lavish that we just got emptiness, and we're just, our house is so big, we're just sitting over here in the corner with like our gold rings on a leather couch with our like. And so it's like, I love that there's waste thing. We associate luxury with this like absorbent amount of white space that just yields nothing, and it's so funny. We're like, oh, it must be expensive, only their logos in the center. Dang.
Yeah.
It's really a
I
mystery.
In my very early Firebase days, we had our VP of UX, Alex Wolf, shout out. He was very awesome. He was one of those people who could develop so good that you wouldn't imagine he was doing the design. He was, he had design, but could design so good, people would assume he couldn't develop. And once I designed something and did it, and he was like, "It's very cramped." And then I was like, I couldn't see it. And then he was like, "Go look at any luxury goods store." And he's like, "There's one bag on a giant white thing." And he was like,
Yep.
"And that says this is so important that you have to look at this." And he's like, "There's no other bags. They're not taking up all this other space. You're not picking between bags to look at. There's one bag." And that stuck with me for the rest of my, so far throughout my career, is like
Yeah,
that,
that's
just
nice.
the physical example.
Yeah, I had my Kevin Hale was like the design lead at Wufoo when I started there, and he was just a great designer. So I feel grateful to how seriously he took that. And you can see, I feel like you can see it all the time. Like Guillermo at Vercel, you can just tell that dude has like good taste in design. I don't know if he considers himself a designer or ever was or whatever, but you can just tell it kind of starts at the top over
Dark
there.
mode luxury. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, good stuff. Yeah, I ran CSS tricks for a long time, and I put that in my notes because I found it notable thinking back that I don't think I'm particularly good at trickery. I just like appreciate it. Like I don't think there's one CSS trick that I can claim that's like the one that Chris Coyier put out in the world. Yet I'm a lover of them. and appreciate when other people do really clever, interesting, fancy stuff in CSS. I always just looked at that, and I could like dissect it, I could explain it, I could showcase it or talk about it, but I'm not very good at like coming up with one. So I'll
Conjuring
put
them.
that.
Yeah, I think that's how most of us are. Because again, it's
Yeah.
just like taste stuff. This person made a sweet treat, and you were collecting them on that site, and just like you were a massive curator and appreciator of sweet CSS treats.
Mm-hmm.
They called them tricks, but they could have been treats. I don't know. Maybe it's Tricks
Yeah,
the
yeah.
cereal. I don't know. But yeah, that's really nice that you did that. And I think that's a way that everyone likes to consume stuff. They love bite-sized nuggets. It's like why Twitter is kind of popular. If you can make a tweet that's like gives people something in that tiny nugget, they're like, I like this. I feel smarter, even though I did nothing. I would like more
Yeah,
of these,
yeah,
please.
yeah.
That
Right. It can be a little
keeping
effective too. Learning in little nuggets is not the worst way to learn.
keeping CSS small is something I'm terrible at. Like I very much like I go to a site and I will see someone be like, and then this is the card or this is the widget. And then I look at like the 5 or 6 properties and then I'm always just like, one, cool, 2, how? Like I don't understand. Like every time I write CSS, I write it and then I'm like, but I have like 12 things. And it's not even that I'm using shorthands or stuff like that. It's just like or not using shorthands and I can't do it. And like all my CSS files, it's just like, I saw a talk a very long time ago about CSS being like kudzu. It just kind of just grows and grows and grows. And then that's how I feel like my CSS is. It's just like a kudzu garden. And I'm always just kind of like, I could chop it down, but it's just going to grow back.
Yeah. You have to like, does it matter? Are we talking about a couple of K in the end of gzipped CSS? Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. That's a tricky one because there's programmatic stuff. I mean, whatever you feel about Tailwind, they're winning. And as far as
Yeah.
like the size of shipped CSS, that approach
Absolutely.
generally makes little
Yeah.
tiny CSS things. So if that
That's a
somehow
big
is at the
trade-off
top of your
plus.
list, yeah, somehow if that's
For
a big
me,
problem for your team, that's the way to go.
it's just having rules that aren't specific enough. Like for example, like markdown generation. Styling things that are generated by markdown is basically kind of like I'm going to set some rules for when things happen, but then it's like real life and then the plan begins and then everything goes to chaos. And then you're like, but I set rules and you weren't supposed to do that. And
That's
now
probably
you
true of
are.
any CMS that you're not hand
Yeah.
authoring the HTML, even like the
Yes.
output of a WordPress bar for whatever, like it's actually a good idea. Like you shouldn't be worried in your CMS about adding a
Yeah.
class to the third P or something. You're like, that's not the right way to kind of author raw content. So that encourages you to be more clever with your CSS then and write,
See, this
Yeah.
interests me greatly because of your history here. Because I manage the Firebase blog, and I'm always like, I really want to make some cool, fancy layout that like this article just pops, and then someone writes it, and then I want it to just generate, and so it just kind of works. So it's like, hey, look, you just write that sentence or that paragraph, and I know how to just make it pop. And if you maybe put something in the front matter, it'll trigger it, and so you can say like pop true or whatever. It doesn't really work all the time. Like maybe on the very first one, and then as soon as people start trying to reuse it, it just totally breaks down. They write a sentence that's too long, or something goes in a wrong order. They put an image first, or something happens, and everything
Okay.
dies. Whereas with CSS tricks, the articles were so uniform. Sometimes things were very popped, sometimes they were not. You had different formats, you had almanacs, you had all the sorts of things, and I'm always just looking at that and just being like,
I don't know if
how?
anybody's got that right. That's tricky. I feel like if we're talking about popping, like doing something unusual in a blog post,
Yeah.
there's a couple of ways to do that. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from just putting a style tag in the middle of some HTML. And you would know in your CMS then that style tag is going to get barfed out exclusively on that page because it's part of the content of that post. So that gives you some power without really any interesting tooling
Yeah, I've done that on web.dev
do
articles.
scope scales.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? Oh, that's cool. That slipped through the. But you
Slipping
got to
right
be
through
careful
it.
on what you're going to do in there, because that gives you ultimate power. Like, you could mess with the header in that style block if you wanted to. You could do dramatic things. So it's on you to like be a little careful with what you're doing in there. Probably keep it to like styling a class that's uniquely present in that post. And then if you're just styling like a block quote or whatever, like, I'm going to rotate this block quote 3 degrees because I think it's going to look really cool that way. That's fine. That's going to last. That'll be okay. But if you're like, I'm going to take this block and I'm going to make it edge to edge wide or something, that might work today, but like the design of tomorrow might be like, well, we have a sidebar now that we didn't then, so this thing's going to wank right over that sidebar next year when this gets redesigned, and
I
nobody's
want to
going to
talk about
revisit this.
@scope now.
Yeah.
@scope has proximity. This is like a weird use case. I've never really thought the proximity was going to be that effective, but if you're writing a blog post and you put a style tag in line there, that style tag is right next to the component, this block quote that you used, and then voila, proximity and scope. It's tight. You don't have to worry about a bunch of.
That's
Anyway,
nice.
that's
That
kind
is
of
a good use case.
That's kind of
Yeah.
neat. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
I don't mind it. I mean, to me, I hate to, like, I get that it's useful, but you could also just like put one class name at the top of that post that's called
That's what I
like
do now.
post
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, and then scope every selector, and it's like, by scope I mean put dot 1, 2, 3 at the beginning of every selector that you write, and you got scope. Not as clean, maybe. It's not like a problem with it, but it's like not something that we couldn't do before. Just right.
I'm bad at @scope. How are y'all at @scope? Have you tried it? Do you care about it? Are you interested? What's the dealio? I don't know. @scope.
I've read about it, and then is it out of Canary now? Because when it was in Canary behind a flag, I was like, ooh, that's a bridge
It's
too
still
far
in Canary
for me.
behind a flag. Yeah.
Yeah, I have sort of a thing where if I have to click buttons to do it, I just that's kind of my day job, is to like, fight through like gates and guards and try things that aren't ready yet. So whenever it comes to the web, I'm like, if it's out of a flag, I might try it. If it's in a flag, it's just I'm not gonna do it. Just,
It depends on how
fun.
fun it is. Like I'm more than
True.
happy to open it for something like, scroll driven
View
animations or something
transitions.
where it's
Yeah.
I did do
where
it
it's
for
gonna
view
be awesome.
transitions.
But if
Yeah.
it's just like, here's a way to write more idiomatic CSS, I'm like, yeah.
See, one question actually, continuing on this whole generation. Sorry, this is like I could talk about blog post generation styling stuff forever because I'm very bad at this, but yet I love it. So you were like, well, you could drop a style tag in there and then you can do whatever you want. Yes, that's true. However, there is a cost, as there is to doing anything. And this is a cost that I know that you know very well, is that all that works, you make all this customization, you're really happy today, maybe even happy a month from now. But then all of a sudden, you want to restyle the whole blog, which I know you have done several times at massive scale. And that's fine if you have certain amounts of articles, but when you are publishing nonstop and you're doing things like that nonstop, how do you
That's what I mean. Like that's what I
that?
mean. You got to be careful. Every time you make a little custom change like that, you got to kind of just feel it out and be like, does this feel pretty contained? Like, is this within a set of rules that I've kind of established for myself for what I'm allowed to do? And that I know even during a massive redesign, I will respect what's generally happening here. And I feel like that respect level started at like the rectangle of the content itself. Like, I'm not going to do a redesign that like messes with what a chunk of content is. I'm not going to like all of a sudden make it 200 pixels wide or something. Like, it's probably going to be between like mobile size and say 650 pixels or whatever it is wide, so I can trust that. I'm not going to jut anything into it. I'm not going to I even decided at one point that the background of that would always be white, which that's you wouldn't make that decision now, but I decided every screenshot I take, if I can trust that there'll be a white background behind it. So if I want to like lean into that white background, I can somehow. Again, you wouldn't probably make that choice now, but I did then. I had like this set of rules that even during a big redesign, that I wouldn't break those X rules,
I see.
Nice.
So It's like having a little bit of foresight into like saying like, hey, I know I'm probably going to redesign this thing totally, but
Yeah.
so I'm not going to write
Design system
rules.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not going to structurally destroy this or change this. Or if I do set rules, they're for like very, very good reasons. Like this should always be white for, I don't know,
Yeah, and
accessibility,
like don't
contrast, or
reach
whatever.
out as much as you can. Don't like with your custom styling, don't reach out of the content area itself as much as you can. And if you
Right.
do, then it should be a template of its own. In WordPress land, you could literally just make a new template and name
Right.
it. So I'd name one, like, for example, I'd name it no sidebar, and it just would
Right.
be a version of that blog post with no sidebar. And then I know that I need to honor that as the redesign goes forward, is that template still needs to have no sidebar. Whatever else is going on, that
That
still needs to be true in the redesign. Yeah.
that makes me feel good because I do that. I always have like base templates that kind of just like set up the world and important things. And then I have like basically navigation style templates where it's like, hey, what kind of header do you have? What kind of footer do you have? And then I
Yeah.
try to like jam everything in there. But if I want to get rid of this header because I'm like, oh, this header's too big, I want to drop it to be really minimal because I want the blog post to pop on this one, then I have to basically create a new template that's like no header, blog post must pop dot template or
Right.
whatever.
And the
yeah.
wrong way to do that then would be to write the styles that do that job in the post itself, because like that's not going to age well.
I have done that too, where I have basically said like, oh, I'm going to decide this in the front matter. So in the front matter, you can select kind of like, do I want a header in this? And that's more so responsibility of layout. And then I've done that. And then basically once you start doing that, you are configuring like the world of like things that pop in and out around you. And then that's where people are like, oh, I don't want the header on this one, but I want to do that. And then my not good CSS.
Yeah, it's become data at that point. And it's like, usually when you set data, you need to like respect it forever. And that's hard. I mean, occasionally you need to break that, but ideally you don't. You know, you don't want a bunch of key value pairs or whatever in your front matter that are now meaningless. Now you've made a bunch of weird problems for your future self.
I feel like y'all just helped me realize something about Tailwind, that Tailwind is bad at redesigns. Like if you've built your whole site with Tailwind, that's a really hard thing to redesign because you didn't separate your content from your styling. They were one and together, and it was really great during it. But
I hate to tell you, Adam, it's kind of the original criticism of
Oh, is it really? I feel like it's
so.
app properties. I'm like, at keyframes, how do you do an app property? How do you, anything that starts with at, is there a new syntax? Probably a new syntax for that.
Yeah. The fact that you even have to do hovers and stuff and like custom properties, it's like everything that CSS can do, you have to invent a new abstraction for. So you're kind of saying like that whatever abstraction I think of will be better than CSS does it. Tricky. Yeah, redesigns is rough. You'd almost have to like almost write like a class scrubber script or something. Like I'd rather start from scratch than
it's a find and replace. Yeah, you're like, I'm going to find all of the uses of BG Indigo and switch them to BG Lime. You know, I also thought of a funny joke in there. We're talking about front matter, and I'm like, is there anything like back matter? And then I was like, oh, front matter, back matter, mullet matter. There's a party in the front. Got mullet matter, so I'm going to put that into my next front end framework. It's going to be mullet, where you got party in the front, business in the back, right? Which part of the team are you on?
David made me think of is that like surely there must be a system for this. You said some line like that earlier, and that there kind of isn't in CSS. I think like the longer you do it, you think of your own system. You're like, this is how I do CSS. And then it starts to feel really right to you. And there's this tendency then that you're like, you know what, I'm going to name it and blog it. Mine is the star system or whatever. And then I always read those of other people's and I'm like, I don't have anything against this, but I'm not going to like just follow it or something. Like it's almost meaningless to me. Other people's
I'm
CSS
bad at following
systems.
Methodologies too. This is a good one. I think everyone's bad. I loved it when BEM was out and BEM was so hot and everyone's like Googling how to name things. They're like, I would like to follow BEM, which I love. I love BEM, but I don't know what to name this right now. And you're like, is this a modifier? And everyone's like, go to that website that names them for you. You're like, oh no, okay, now I could just use the BEM naming website. right, and it'll just
Right.
It's
And it was
yeah.
light on methodology because it was really just a way to name your classes. I don't think it got as deep as the other ones that are like, you should think about layouts, components, and one-offs or something. People, somehow that
Oh,
would click
it's
with somebody's
CSS or whatever.
brain.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I'm not even thinking of one in particular, but people would tend to like break down the responsibilities of CSS in their own special way, you know? And I don't know, like, that it doesn't hurt, like, I'm not telling anybody not to share anything like that, but I think if those things don't click with you, that's okay, because I think of the more CSS you write, you'll fall into your own little "what makes sense to
Yeah,
me"
just like an
pattern.
instrument. You gotta, when you're just learning an instrument, everybody's got like, oh, learn this pattern, learn that pattern, do this strategy, do this, buy this guitar, buy that one. And all of that it doesn't have to, or even give you anything immediately. It's really still, there's still so much like intrinsic value that we bring as developers. And this is something that people, they accuse, that well, not accuse, they say their tool is why they were successful. But I'm like, why are you saying the guitar made you
Yeah,
play such a
because it
good
makes for a
show?
better interview, like, if once you're really good and you do an interview, they're like, "Give me some advice," they'll be like, "I don't know, do whatever you want," which is kinda like the it's kinda like the best advice because 'cause you're like, "Don't do what I did.
Well,
That's my
just build
quirky crap."
websites. That's a great one. Mine has always been like fingers on the
Right.
keyboard. Like you can't
There's
just read your way into success in web development. You can't. You have to fingers on
Yeah,
the
hands on
keyboard.
home row,
Yeah.
kids. Mm.
there's actually a name for this. It's called like the red folder the red folder technique or something, where basically if you interview someone who's like a straight A student and you ask them, how do you become a straight A student, they feel like they have to give you a very profound answer. They can't be like, well, you organize your time and you study really hard and you like decide that this is a priority in your life and you do it and you make sacrifices to do it, is like the real answer to get anywhere.
Right.
And as soon as you say words like make sacrifices, people are like, ooh,
Ugh,
yeah, don't
yeah.
like that one.
Be nice and
But
work
so,
hard, you know?
right.
Yeah.
But what they'll do is they'll say like, oh, so I use these red folders. And so then as like humans, we're like, oh, an object will make me better. Got it. Okay. So go out and buy red
Right.
folders. Good. That, oh, I can do that.
I don't
So
even
it's like,
begrudge any before because it's a way to extract money out of the world is self-help essentially,
Sure
I
is.
almost wanna lean
Yeah.
into it even more, I wanna
Who doesn't want to be
write a book of
superhuman?
hard rules that tell you that if you do what I say you're gonna do, I don't know, just because I don't think you're really harming anybody, you're just giving them one
I,
little way that might work.
Yeah.
I, I do think if you write one of those articles where you're like this methodology or do this, you should be required to write like why you shouldn't do this section. Because I had written an article once called
Mm,
I'd never published, and called grid based components, where like I wanted to write about why you would use like actual JSX components or whatever framework components to specify which columns things go in. So it's like sidebar, this, that, and then it uses, and then they just basically annotate classes. There's nothing, and then they have children or slots inside of them. So like nothing big, but it's like a nice way of saying like, if I'm not really comfortable with layout and I'm a big JavaScript developer, I just want this to pop into that part of the page and it does all its stuff, then I use that component and I know it's going to handle itself. And that sounds kind of nice and comforting for that kind. And when I went to write, like, why wouldn't you use this? One of the first lines I wrote was, kind of defeats the whole purpose of CSS grid. And I was like, oh yeah, it does. Because with grid, we don't really care to have like a container element to
Auto
tell us
placement is
where to.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because now
yeah,
auto
and then
placement is
now you need an
gone.
API for what about
Yes.
when the screen is this size, and when you find yourself replicating another
Yes.
API, it's kinda why I don't like the part syntax in Shadow DOM because you're like, you can't it's like now you're on your own to make up a CSS like syntax because you can't write part
Mhm.
header space and then use the rest of CSS. Like I'd like to select the part and then select the H1 within the part. You can't. So it's saying, oh, wait,
Yeah.
you have
I'm surprised
right.
it's not more popular given TypeScript's popularity, because what you're doing is formalizing the interface. You're formalizing what can be styled and you're promoting it. You're saying that this part, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with you. I think
Yeah.
part's kind of weird, but I am surprised though that It is the same interface that TypeScript gives. People are redefining all these variable names, and creating types and making
I don't know. I mean,
functions that
the
accept
analogy
parameters. And
falls
it's like,
over
why don't they
when
like this here?
TypeScript is JavaScript. So you get TypeScript, but then anything JavaScript can do, TypeScript can do. Whereas part, anything CSS can do is not. You can't do it with part.
Well, once it's exposed, you have to select it using someone's exposed selector. And once you have that in your hand, you're good to go. But because it's not like part can say, well, in this part, you cannot set background. Oh, they can't do that. All they can say is they can only select this element. And then at that point, you can go ham on it.
But not its children, not an nth child, not a hover, nothing interesting about
no
it.
descendant selectors that just kind of go,
That's what bugs me about it, because you're like, well, I want the children too. So you're like, well, how do I name it then? Do I use dash
it's just like TypeScript
list
though.
items?
We're like TypeScript, you can only get to the stuff that other people have formalized the interface for, and that's what everyone loves about TypeScript. They're like formal interfaces. I love it when you've limited my access and given me a healthier abstraction, and that's sort of like, so I'm like, I'm just a little confused because I think that the same thing that they're doing there can be done here, and I'm like, whatever, you guys can go right. And I think it's funny, like here's another JavaScript comparison, is JavaScript grows and grows too. All you do is add functions and add lines. Why is everyone like, CSS grows and it's an evil property of the language? I'm like, that's what they all do. What language are you writing in where you don't write more? Plus, what could there be a JavaScript Tailwind? Is it be like, like all you use are the functions that someone else gives you? So you just like, I don't even know JavaScript. All I do is import this library and then call it. You're still writing JavaScript, just like you're still writing CSS with Tailwind. You're just like, it's just through an abstraction.
Maybe
but
that's
I just
why
wonder,
could you do that with Alpine? Because it kind of is like that, where JavaScript has moved into attributes, essentially.
Yeah, it's a little more declarative. I guess it's declarative at the template level. And that's what I think a lot of the success of Tailwind is. We moved into a component model, and Tailwind was like, we're right there in your JSX, which is where people love to sit. They love sitting in the component file. This is why single file components are cool too. They just love sitting there. They're like, this is where I work. This is where I get my shit done. So bring in my classes and let me decorate while I'm here. I don't have to go somewhere else to decorate.
They're not totally wrong. I mean, whatever.
They're not totally wrong. I think it's a good workflow, other than when you need to redesign.
Right. Well, I just thought that, remember, that was, I don't know, I grew up in this period of like, you need to separate your concerns. Absolutely. And the idea of putting an on-click handler on a button element in your HTML was just absolutely wrong. That would be the smelly code you
I did that yesterday, and it felt real good.
And it turns out that was wrong, though. That like, to scold people for that was incorrect. That actually is not a bad way to go, because it just mentally ties together this physical button thing, not physical, but physical in the terms of building a website, I guess. Like, there's the button.
Yeah, I mean, I said we were licking things earlier. We can't lick it. That code's not physical. It's only digital.
You'd hit some glass there, I'm afraid, before you got anywhere.
I mean, it's so juicy with the new HDR colors. Have you seen them? You just want to lick the apple colored red on your screen. No, you don't.
Yeah.
Don't lick your screen, everyone. That's gross.
Yeah, turns out.
There was another joke that came up. You were calling kids. You were like, oh, children, the element's children. Oh, they're also just called slots. And I was like, I'm going to start calling my kids slots. And be like, you're slot 1. And the other kid is slot 2. Be like, wait, what are you? I'm like, I'm a parent node. I'm a parent node with two slots, and here they are, slot 1 and slot 2. Yeah. I did not name their parts, Chris.
They named their own parts. Tell you, kids, easily replaced. Very easy.
They're also name slots too.
So funny.
Name slots. Here's another one I wrote down on my list, though, just so I.
Yes, I was going to ask you that. Excellent.
Well, it's just just one of those kind of vulnerable ones, almost like the testing of things. I feel like I'm not as good as I could be or should be, because part of our job and part of what makes CSS development and stuff so tricky is that you're responsible for all the different screen sizes, all the different browsers, all the different input modes, all the different accessibility things, and people with low vision and all that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff you could and should be testing. But personally, I tend to, and this is for worse, not for better, kind of just like lean on experience a little bit more. Just be like, oh, that's, like, I just know that's a problem, so I'm just not going to do it or something, rather than like fresh testing every single time. I don't even test cross browser usually. I'm that lazy these days.
No, this is a really good thing to bring up. Is like testing CSS is hard. It's a hard thing to do right. So then there's all sorts of like automation that we can try. One of my rants that I have here is that it's like everyone in the back end writing JavaScript has one execution target. If you're in Node, you're just running in Node. If you're running it in the browser, you're just running it in the browser. And there's like, that's a standard single consumer type, like to pacify the thing reading your JavaScript is far simpler than the whole front end in CSS. With CSS, we have multiple browsers to pacify. Then we have multiple screen sizes to pacify. Then we have multiple screen readers, and there's double the amount of screen readers that there are in browsers. So the final boss is like way far away. And so like everyone else writing JavaScript is like, oh, it worked. And I'm over here going, I have to make it work across 8 different consuming types. There's a matrix that my code has to live inside of. This is why it's chaotic. This is why a lot of people call it hard, is because the execution space, the place where this code runs is hostile. And it's like full of like demons.
Fortunately,
and monsters.
The cross-browser starting getting easier, but it will never be easier in terms of like click versus swipe and stuff like that. Like that's just that will never be easier.
Next level. Yep.
To be fair with JavaScript, though, if you're starting to talk about like server-side rendering, like in JavaScript frameworks, then you do get the matrix. It gets bad. Like Node versions, browser versions. Like I run a bunch
edges coming out now, so you got like Dino and
yes, exactly. We have a bunch of those. I have libraries with those ones where every time you make a code change, you're like, you feel like you're going to run through a gauntlet. You're like, oh, we just logged something to the console, but now I got to run through these. It's like 12 ones per node version, not per node version, but like including node versions. You're just like, oh,
kind of in that land right now too, trying to server side render more. And man, that is a unique pain, isn't it? I like the little warnings where we just use like next or whatever, but it spits out console warnings. It's like, hey, bro, your whatever happened on the server is different than what happened on the client. You're going to need to know that. And it always like it always annoys me a little bit because I'm like, well, then fix it or whatever, smarty pants. I don't know.
Well, don't do that.
Yeah, your framework. But it's not. It has access to different stuff. Like you literally, in a lot of contexts, you definitely aren't writing window dot anything because the Node server don't know that.
I actually agree with you fully on like just fix it mode, because I was writing my own bespoke terrible server-side rendering frameworks back in like 2016, 2017 using like JSX and all that. And I would run into those problems. And then I was like, oh my God, this is hard. They're right. It's more than just render, server, like hydrate, take over. Like this is really, really tough stuff. So when I started using like meta frameworks, I was like, I won't have to deal with that. Wait, what? I was like, no,
it's back, baby.
But I was, but this is, oh man. I was like, so I agree.
And then, like, I feel like contrast is a pretty clear and present one to check against. So I don't think I'm horrible at that one, but that's not the only kind of color issue that can come up. Like really, if you're really being good about your testing, you're testing against all kinds of different possible vision situations.
Forced color modes.
Dark have I ever done that before shipping something? Have not.
I had a designer who I worked with. So this is, if you're bad at this with colors and contrast, I have a great solution for it. You just work with a really good designer. They tend to, that's it. That's all you have to do. But I worked with on the Firebase blog, I worked with a designer who did not think, it was like revolutionary to me. Adam and I had a discussion with this once that should become a podcast, where he said to me to not really think about things in light mode and dark mode, but just to think about things on surfaces. And he's like, so this is a surface and it might change for light mode and dark mode, or it might not. And he's like, but only these types of text can go on this surface, and only this one can go on that. And everything he picked out beforehand, he picked really high contrast colors, and then everything that was defined as a certain surface layer, I started writing the CSS that way. So this was a certain surface. And then we basically had a contract at all times. This was how it worked. And then when we'd swap out for things for light mode and dark mode, you were just sort of switching the rules. So, I switched that surface, and then we use computed custom properties. So it would just switch like super easy. But what I thought was so interesting is just the amount of thought that went in beforehand to the contrast and the colors, and then agreeing on the surfaces. it made us to the point where we went through like contrast checking. Like we don't have those problems. Like was awesome. It's the only project I've ever had that on though. And it was just the amount of like pre-planning work that went into it.
You know, what makes me think of is when Adam brought up scope though, is that let's say you have this, you did a great job, like you did, wonderful. You got light mode and dark modes, killing it. You got your surfaces, whatever they are. But it's possible that sometimes there's a piece of a page that is just dark on purpose, because maybe in this blog post you decided that like the block quote is going to be like dark mode looking or something because it looks cool or something. That now you have this problem where a light mode outer wrapper and a light mode inner wrapper. And I recall that as being one of the things that Scope was actually kind of good at, because unfortunately you'd have this class high up that said light mode and then a class lower down in the DOM in a div that says dark mode. And that depending on how you wrote your selectors, proximity would be a problem. That, you know, you could write light mode P as color white, and that would win just because it was later in the CSS than dark mode P, because they're both like fighting each other. So we'll give +1 to Scope in its ability to handle those situations.
Yeah, cascade layers helps there too.
I can always tell someone's disdain or even slight disdain for something when you say, you know, that's actually something it's good at.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm a little, Scope isn't my favorite. I'm trying not to be like,
Scope's not my favorite either.
So it's not like a problem for CSS, but it solves these really narrow issues that just I don't care about.
My issue with Scope too is that, like, yeah, you're right. It's solving narrow issues, but then you ask 5 developers in the community, hey, what does @Scope do? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, good. What do you think it should do? And they're like, it's going to make sure that the name doesn't. And you're like, no, it really has nothing to do with names. And they're like, well, then what's it for? And then you're like, I now have to go learn what @Scope is for, because it's not what I thought it was. And then you're like, well, then you go learn what it is. And you're like, I don't really need that.
That's a good point. It doesn't give you this like free unnamed just go, you know, I guess that, there's so much to think about. Because, you know, when you use something like CSS modules, not the ones that are importing into web components, but the old school library that just obfuscated class names, you didn't get free names there either, but you kind of did, because you could be real lazy about what it was named, because it's just going to get messed with anyway. So if you
what's your best Robo Vomit impression? You know, like
card slash
yeah, whatever. 9-8. Please just 4.
Yeah.
I wonder if everyone does that, because I do that too. I'm like reading out class names as they're generated in the browser, because I use CSS modules in the Firebase blog and a ton of projects for that reason. And I'm like, okay, so that's light surface. And
but you did the right thing. I can already tell that you configured it to use the name that you wrote and the name of the file, and then the robot barf. I think that's a nice.
So Astro does that. You look at these styles Astro outputs, and the whole styles pane is card header, and it's just this. And then they wrapped it in where with all these weird little slashes and hashtags, and I'm like, y'all really, you didn't just kind of vomit on my shit. You really threw up on it. This is crazy,
right? Because they want it as the where, so that they're like 100% not messing with the specificity while they're messing with it. Yeah, that's
exactly.
Fine. Vue does that too, though. They use like an attribute situation, and like they turn your class into an attribute, because then it has the same CSS specificity. You know what I mean? Don't they do that?
Hey,
I think they do.
You did well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Svelte and Vue are the ones most appropriate for @Scope, because you can put the style tag next to the element, and then all of a sudden it's like has some of that ability that you wanted it to have, and you know, limiting the lower boundary is nice. But
somehow that doesn't like appeal to me like 1,000,000%. Like the putting the style tag in the component, like I almost prefer to not. Like, can it just sit right next to it in a different file? Really like a tiny, not a big deal thing. But like in my VS Code, sometimes I like to look at them side by side. And in order to do that, then I have to like open the same file in 2 tabs and
split
different
pane.
scroll positions.
That's always funny when you're like, I'm going to split pane on the same file. It kind of feels like 2 separate files, but it's not. Oh, where am I? What is this world?
Yeah. That's not the end of the world, but not my favorite.
something I was thinking about in this, we were talking about like what scope does or what things does. I think that one of the biggest ways that you can give a CSS developer anxiety is if you just go up to them and then just ask them what a property does. You're just like, hi, you like CSS? And they're like, yeah, I love it. And you're like, what does flex basis do? $100 right now.
You picked the hardest one, though. That's impossible. No, flex basis I could do, but like flex shrink. Oh, God.
Because then you get, and then you'd have to record them and you get like hand motions. You'd be like, okay, so there's a box. And
first you got to understand intrinsic size. So that's the first afternoon.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's like this, but then other times it's, I don't know.
Explain why min width 0 is a thing that we type. You're just like, oh man, I don't wanna. That is an embarrassing thing to type in my styles.
What does 100% do? You're like, it's
most of the time nothing. That's the first thing you need to know. Yeah.
you need a parent, and then
that would be a cool statistic if we could figure it out. Like how many with colon 100% semicolons exist on the web that do nothing.
Ooh, and then if you're Jerry McGovern, you could be like, this is how much CO2 we're wasting because we're sending all of these with 100% across the oceans over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the favicon. It's like how much electricity goes to serving favicons that don't exist.
Yeah, there's a like a level of scale though. It'd be like one phone call probably is worth 20 billion of them, and you're like, did you really need to talk to your aunts?
One video chat. Oh man, video chatting's got to be just destroying the planet, right? I don't know.
Well, at least
now I feel bad. We got three of
us.
Got three of us doing this right now. Why you gotta make this personal, Adam?
Sorry.
Don't put the mirror in front of my face, man. Put it somewhere else.
Well, we're reaching.
We are.
We're at 50 minutes. This has been stellar. Is there any last minute stuff you're bad at, or things you just want to comment? Anything on your chest you need to share? Do you want to give us a lick of banjo too? I don't know. You tell me what's up.
Maybe I should, huh? I don't have anything.
You looked awesome on Shop Talk. You were like, "Oh, I picked up the banjo. I'm not that good." And I was like, "Dude, he's like shredded over there. I loved it. I wanted to hear more." I was like, "Every intro should be you playing a little bit of banjo. I'd be so happy."
If it's close.
Oh, yeah, we're getting a treat. Yeah. See, mine's over here.
Oh, we're gonna get a jam. I'm so not musical.
There's no way the timing's gonna work out, but.
Ooh, yeah.
I just need like a tambourine right now.
Oh, I don't know. I was trying to do the deliverance thing for you because I feel like that's always.
That's what I was referencing. Yeah. Is that like the Freebird of banjo? Deliverance.
I don't even know it really. Although I was thinking about the other day, I feel like I should watch that movie again. So people have that's. Yeah, I don't know. They have some impression.
It's a dark
of it in
movie.
Their mind,
You're gonna get some dark vibes.
I think so, but like, is it what you remember it is, or do you have some incorrect? I feel like people remember what they want to remember.
Hunting trip gone very, very wrong. Yes, that's awesome. So you've been practicing a ton. I've been trying to learn my finger picking strategies, and it's not that slow going. But yeah, you sound great, dude.
I need to sit in here properly. I'm crunched in here. I have gotten okay at this thing, by going to festivals and playing all day and stuff. I really am into it. It's definitely my retirement plan.
Yeah, music is cool. I'm a crafter. I love building stuff. But what I love about music is that you get to craft with someone else, and I love the ephemeral nature of it, where you're like, and it's gone. We created something. It was in the air. It filled up the space like magic. You could cut the music with a knife in the room. And then when the music stops, everyone's like, weird. Yeah. This room feels so different now. And you're like, yeah, and it's gone. We'll never play it like that
usually
ever
of
again.
Smiles or something, like people you can even hear that. I love that in recordings when they record there's like 8 seconds after the end of the song, and almost like universally somebody will like laugh or something. Like when they had a good take It was not like they heard a joke. It's not like they played something unexpected or funny. It's just this release of like, man, we got through that. That was
We got
awesome.
through it,
You know?
dude. Y'all, did you vibe that? Yeah, we were on the same wavelength, and we just busted out. And you start laughing. You're like, whoa, I was in another world.
Yeah,
And now I'm back in this room, I guess. Yeah.
totally. It wasn't even any psilocybin involved. Just regular.
Well,
All right. Well,
Chris,
thanks for having me on, fellas.
yes,
This was awesome.
thank
Of
you
course.
for coming on the podcast and sharing all the things that you're bad at. And yeah, Adam and I will be doing this every week, talking about things we're bad at and bringing on other people. And so thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all in the next Bad at CSS podcast.